Good evening. It's good to see you all here this evening. We're delighted that you have come out clearly on a quite rainy evening. Our speakers are already engaged in great conversation, but we're glad for all of you to come. I am David Forney. I'm one of the pastors here at First Presbyterian Church. I do not want to take very much time, but I'm glad that you all have this handout about Welcoming Greater Charlottesville, who is this is their program, their idea, and it has just been splendid and incredibly well received. Though this is not the first time that First Pres has wanted to engage in interreligious conversations. We have partnered with Rumi Forum before. We have had a long and really great connection with CBI, particularly with the Pacham, bringing guests here in the winter and partnering with CBI to care for those overnight. So this feels very natural to us here at First Pres, and so we want you to feel that welcome as well tonight. I'm going to let Jessica, who is the moderator this evening, introduce everyone, but I want to introduce Jessica because it's a real gift that she brings to us to connect these thoughts and ideas and help lead us through the conversation. She studies medieval Jewish, and you'll see this, in Islamic culture and intellectual history, connections between the Jewish and Muslim communities in the Mediterranean and the Middle East. She is at UVA, and so we get to claim her as a local. So welcome and delighted you all are here.
Well, thank you very much, David, and thank you, of course, to Welcoming Greater Charlottesville for putting this panel together. It's wonderful to see some familiar faces from our previous session just over a month ago, and also to see some new faces. We welcome you all to the conversation. We're very pleased to be here with you this evening. So I would like to keep my opening remarks very brief so that we can hear from our wonderful speakers themselves. I'll just say, for those of you who were here a month ago, the focus at that point was very much on the religious roots and attitudes in the Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions for a practice of welcoming the stranger. And today, we're able to focus on the practice itself of welcoming the stranger with insights from our three panelists. So I'll begin by introducing Andrea Gagne to my right, who is the Senior Program Manager for Private Sponsorship at the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, or HIAS. We'll hear also from Susannah Lepley, the Executive Director of Church World Service in Harrisonburg. And then finally, at the far right of the table, Ibrahim Anli, the Executive Director of the Rumi Forum. So without further ado, I'd like to ask all three of our panelists to begin our discussion by introducing their organization and telling us a bit about the projects, the priorities, the initiatives of those organizations. And I'll begin with you, Andrea.
Thank you so much. So HIAS is actually the oldest refugee resettlement agency in the United States. We have been operating for about 140 years, and the majority of that time was spent welcoming Jewish refugees. The organization in the early 2000s took a look around and realized that the world had changed, and there were not as many Jewish refugees, thankfully, as there used to be. However, there were a lot of other people that were in the exact same situation that we had found ourselves in generations ago. And so the organization made the decision to expand their mission. And so today we help refugees from all over the world, from all different faiths, ethnicities, and backgrounds. And we bring this work to more than 20 countries around the world. And in the United States, a resettlement affiliate network of 30 sites. I actually think that we just reached 31. And so we put into practice every day the idea that we used to help refugees because they were Jewish, and now we help refugees because we are Jewish. The organization is also, as our president likes to say, one of the most diverse Jewish agencies that there is, with quite a large number of people who are from the same backgrounds as the people that we are working with. But that's a little bit about us. I'll just say very briefly that my program that I work on is specifically a private sponsorship program within that organization. So what we focus on is equipping everyday Americans with the ability to welcome refugees through community sponsorship, which is a civil society-led way of helping newcomers get settled into the country. I will talk more about that a little bit later.
I'm going to focus more instead of Church World Service, which is an international organization that is combined, that comprises several mainline denominations of the Christian faith. Instead of working with that, I'll just focus primarily I work out of Harrisonburg, so I'll focus primarily on that. We are we are CWS owned or Church World Service owned. We work with the resettlement period, which is the first 90 days when people come, which is mostly what people think of when they hear a refugee resettlement. But we have a whole host of services that we provide for up to 5 years. We work with employment, so employment training, getting people ready to work, and then also getting them better and better jobs throughout the 5 years that we're allowed to work with them. We work with health access, so when they first come, we help them get access to a family practice provider. Anything that they need from then until 5 years, we try and help them learn how to navigate the system. How many people think that the US healthcare system is easy to navigate? Raise your hands. Nobody? Come on. So we help people navigate the system, access specialist services. Y'all are very lucky here in Charlottesville because IRC cooperates with UVA Medical School to provide healthcare for refugees, newly arrived refugees. We do intensive case management. In addition to, so the Modern Refugee Act is very geared towards self-sufficiency, very quick and then durable self-sufficiency. But if somebody has some challenges with that, some additional vulnerabilities, then we can provide intensive case management for up to a year. We also have, and that period from like day 90-ish, starting a little bit sooner, up until 5 years when they can become citizens, is what we call the integration period. That first very beginning period is what we call the resettlement period. And the vast majority of our services are actually integration services. And things look a little bit different in Harrisonburg than in Charlottesville because all of the resettlement agencies sort of tailor the needs to the community. So in Harrisonburg, we have a strong youth program. We take kids to the National Forest to look for salamanders. We take them, we have a program that focuses on coding or kids in computer science. So we have a computer coding camp that's really popular every summer. And then also we have, in addition to the integration period, we've started working with unaccompanied minors. So we help folks, kids who are here and have been released to sponsors in the community. We help them with case management services as well. And then we have immigration legal services, so helping people get green cards. And citizenship, we helped over almost 100 people last year get their citizenship. We also have changing relationships in the family. So as people come to this country and the relationships between genders changes a little bit based on this new country, we help folks manage that. I think that's it for me for now.
Thank you. Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Ibrahim Anli. I am the Executive Director of Rumi Forum, which is a DMV area, Greater DC area organization serving that region primarily through interfaith, interreligious programs. The organization is not alone in its work. It's part of a transnational network known as the Hizmet movement. The word Hizmet means service in Turkish language. The movement originated in Turkey, and it is faith-inspired and service-oriented. So in the motivations and key references, you'll see very close, solid connection to Sunni Islamic resources and spirituality, which is based on a methodology of self-reflexivity rather than absolutism. So therefore, the movement has been a very important leading advocate of such self-reflexive interpretation of Islam rather than its absolutist forms. And in the practice, this manifests as seeking personal renewal through personal devotion and service. And again, in the overall, it is faith-inspired in motivation, yet it is faith-neutral in the way it is manifested. In its very foundations, the Hizmet movement borrows these Islamic teachings and identifies 3 problems with 3 remedies. To prevent conflict, we engage in dialogue. To address ignorance, we work on education. And to eliminate poverty, we work not only on relief, but we promote entrepreneurship so people can become self-sustaining. And each image is from one of those efforts. So in the top image, you'll see our late honorary chairman, Mr. Fethullah Gülen, who was known as the visionary of the Hizmet vision, who recently passed away. The second image is from a school in northern Iraq, Iraqi Kurdistan. The movement operates schools all around the world, and the schools are non-confessional. They don't teach religion. And the third image is from one of the relief projects that youth from Virginia were undertaking in Kenya. Rumi Forum has 3 main pillars of its work. One is we build relationships, and these are through interfaith engagement programs, such as our scriptural reasoning program, and the credit goes to UVA. That's where it originated, led by Peter Oakes and then other scholars. So we are a partner of this effort of scriptural reasoning, and the other is from one of our iftar gatherings. So this pillar of our work has a very strong relationship building element. And the other is we offer learning opportunities, sometimes in the form of film screenings or panels or book talks, where you still have, of course, a relationship building element, but primarily this learning element is stronger. So the image on the left is from a film screening, and the one on the right is one of our Rumi commemorations with a keynote with expertise on Rumi. And we mobilize leaders. So at the core of this interfaith work, of course, clergy plays an important role, but we believe that the role of faith in life in multiple layers and circles. To give you a very recent example, our annual leadership forum last year discussed the issue of religious literacy. And we invited people from 4 different public sectors: law enforcement, education, healthcare, and chaplaincy. And in each professional spoke about how relevant it is to have and to advance religious literacy in those particular arenas, so their work for the public will be more effective. These are the 3 pillars of our work in the field. And sitting in Washington, D.C., we also have a research center that publishes monthly papers and book reviews.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to hear an overview of your organizations and the kinds of work they do. Now, you've already touched upon this, of course, in your opening remarks, but I would ask each of you at this point, and we'll pick up right with you where we left off, Ibrahim, to talk about the ways specifically that these organizations center the task of welcoming the stranger, what welcoming the stranger means in these organizations, and what kinds of initiatives are in place to do so.
Yeah, so our work, as we were discussing earlier, kind of represents a spectrum here. So there is this effort, the challenging effort of bringing people here and helping them settle on normal lives and establish their routines. And then after they are here, through years or decades or maybe few generations, being in the same setting, same communal setting, unfortunately, does not guarantee being proximate and being literate with one another's culture and faith. So that's where our work begins. I'll just mention one particular project that we have worked on, which is the Interreligious Communities Project. The project aims to bring communities to visit one another's sacred spaces and let the space speak in a way to teach the guest and make this an experience of experiencing the hospitality of the host community and equip themselves with tools of interfaith dialogue and eventually build an interfaith community. This is a co-chaired project with Rumi Forum and Sharing Sacred Spaces. The one nearly universal challenge, maybe with a slight bit of exaggeration in interfaith work, is we tend directly to turn to clergy who are already extremely busy with their existing weekly, daily, monthly duties. In this project, we made sure that it was all lay leaders taking the lead, doing the logistics and doing the operational work, of course, with the blessing and supervision and support of the clergy, but this has been extremely helpful. First, we did a set of meetings to build a team spirit as they engaged in design and planning, and also build some interpersonal contact with one another through many exercises. And then we started publicizing the visits to the worship sites. This is what an announcement looks like. The site visits were open to public, but it was mainly the members of these 7 congregations that were in attendance. The site visit is the heart of the program. One strength of this project is its emphasis on architecture. This being a worship site, every symbol, every piece of space, every corner has something to tell to the guests. So it's a very fruitful discovery for the guests, and probably for the hosts, it's been a nice rediscovery of what they are walking into every week or every day. So there is a tour and a brief history of that worship site, and then in the larger sense, an introduction to the faith. The host community invites 1 or 2 members to tell their personal stories. So we are just trying to build all these elements into one evening, and then, of course, a shared meal with a lot of conversations. The project, every cycle of the project is followed by interviews. And what I'm just gonna list here are based on those interview responses. Participants reported to have a wider perspective, a breakdown of stereotypes, loss of defensiveness and fear, a deep knowledge of the difference, and overcoming of one's own limitations, and a lot of fun experiences, a sense of relief and satiation of curiosity, just like the Krister Stendhal's 3 golden rules. Like, if you're curious about a people, go to those people. Don't turn to other sources. And sense of solidarity, which leads to the end of the final phase of the project. All the communities got together and they signed a pledge of solidarity. Now we are moving into the second phase, which is what we can do together to generate added value for the larger community. But back to my earlier point, this is all happening in Northern Virginia, except for one DC congregation. And once you get into this work, you realize that taking geographic proximity for granted is such an illusion. Someone just needs to walk in and invite people. It's not a problem of openness, but we need to take proactive initiatives to invite people to these kind of efforts and to help them welcome one another into their most intimate, most sacred settings.
Thank you. Susannah.
I sort of started out with the services, so I'll go back to sort of one of the foundational stories of CWS. We are about half the number of years old. We're a little over 75 years. And we started out after World War II, where mainline denominations would gather food, wheat, and ship it to Europe and other places that had been ravaged after World War II, and then refugees would come. And the sort of foundational story that I remember is there was a network of churches that had agreed to welcome refugees. And so this volunteer guy would go to Ellis Island and look for people who didn't have anybody to welcome them. And he would go up to them and say, "Would you like us to help you resettle?" And they said yes, which seems pretty scary to me. And then he would take them back to the office and call all of these churches across the United States and say, like, we have a family of 5 or 6. And if they would say yes, he would put them on a train, and at the end of that train ride would be a church that would pick them up. And that is sort of where we started and where we continue. We were started out as a group of Christian denominations, but we are right now very, very definitely faith-based, but very welcoming of any volunteer from any faith or no faith, and also employees from a variety of faiths. So we welcome everybody on the journey of we welcome welcomers. So that's sort of where we are.
Thank you. Andrea, will you tell us a little bit about what this looks like for HIAS?
Absolutely. So the specific program that I work on, like I said, is private sponsorship. And right now, the main way that this looks is through a program called the Welcome Corps. And this is one of the biggest expansions to our refugee resettlement program in a little more than 40 years since it was created. And this gives regular, everyday Americans the chance to be trained and certified to welcome refugees as volunteers. So essentially, as a group of 5 to 10 volunteers, you can form your own mini resettlement agency, welcome one family, and focus your efforts on getting that family through their initial resettlement period. Many of our groups continue to be friends much longer than the initial resettlement period of 3 months, but that is the structure that's in place. And this is something that has been working very effectively for the last 2 years now. We have 2 different pathways that can take. One we call Sponsor the Stranger, where you're matched blindly with a refugee family you've never met. And the other is to sponsor someone you know, where you can actually name a specific refugee who you would like to help settle into the U.S. And that begins a process of the U.S. government doing the very, very onerous work of checking background checks and interviews. It's a very long process, but just being named by a sponsor now can get you considered for that resettlement. HIAS is a private sponsor organization, so that means that for groups that are welcoming their either their loved ones or their strangers, we provide additional training, support, guidance, and oversight to make sure that they actually are able to troubleshoot some of the challenges that come up, support them through the journey, make sure they understand what needs to be done. So what does this actually mean? Because you can say the spiel 20 times a day, and it doesn't really illustrate how meaningful that is. So I'll just share two quick stories about what this has looked like recently. Names are changed, but there's a family of four, or actually a family of three, living in Syria 13 years ago. Yasmin and her husband and her one-year-old baby. On October 31st, 2011, she and her family had to flee Syria. They went to Lebanon, and she's never going to forget that it was October 31st because that was her son's first birthday. They stayed in Lebanon for 13 years in limbo. Eventually, she had a miracle. She got pregnant again with another little baby boy. And around that time, she was told her family is going to get resettled to America so that she can have this child have a new life somewhere safer. But they do the interviews, they do the background checks, this very long process. They don't know when they're going to come to America because there are 125,000 refugees around the world who are in the pipeline to come to America, who have had their background checks and their interviews with the U.S., but they can't come to the U.S. because we don't have enough domestic capacity to welcome them. And this is due to structural challenges, right? Affordable housing, living wages at entry-level jobs for non-English speakers. It's very hard right now to resettle refugees, and agencies are doing incredible work, but the barriers are so great. Her family was one of those people who was waiting and waiting. They got the news that war was breaking out south of Lebanon, and the area where they were living was put under forcible evacuation orders by the Israeli Defense Force. And so they were displaced again internally for 1 month. Her two sons were sleeping in their car, and she was sleeping outside under the trees with her husband. And then they were told they're coming to America. Someone is ready to welcome you. You can get on a plane in a week and a half. And they traveled to America, and they arrived in the airport on October 31st of 2024 on her son's 14th birthday, not to a resettlement agency, but to a private sponsor group of everyday Americans who mobilized together to form a sponsor group. So when we say sponsor someone you don't know, sponsor the stranger, this is one example of what that can look like. Sponsor someone you know is similar, but when you're doing your application to sponsor someone you know, you form your sponsor group of 5 to 10 people, you put together your background checks, you take your training, and you get certified. There's also a portion of your application where you can put a specific refugee referral in. And so one family that comes to mind for me is a young man named Adam. He was a Sudanese late teen living in Egypt with his mom and dad and his 4 younger siblings. And they won the diversity lottery. Does anyone here, do people know the DV lottery? Every year the US gives a set number, small number of spaces for people to basically literally get a lottery for an immigration visa interview. It doesn't guarantee you anything, but you can get the interview at the local US embassy and potentially come to America. They won that. And when they were waiting for their interviews, they were waiting and waiting. They finally got their interview at the US Embassy a month before Adam's 21st birthday. And he was told that he could not be part of the family's case anymore because he was an adult now. His parents had to decide, do we keep our whole family behind, or do we get our other 4 kids to a place where they have a future? So they made the difficult decision to leave Adam behind. They spent the next 10 years, getting emotional, they spent the next 10 years talking to immigration lawyers, trying to find a pathway to get him to America, and nothing was available to them until the Welcome Corps opened. And they made their sponsor group. They had enough family members to be there for their 5 members. They did their application, they submitted it. And last week, Adam's father picked him up from the airport in Philly and brought him to their home. And in both of these cases, the sponsors are now starting a journey of welcoming these people. That means they're responsible for finding people's first jobs, getting their apartments, signing kids up for school, signing them up for benefits, figuring out why one of the Social Security cards didn't come when all of the rest of them did, taking them to the zoo and taking pictures of them in front of the meerkat exhibit. Everything that a resettlement agency would do, plus a little bit extra, because it is a community sponsorship initiative. So that, when we say regular everyday Americans can do this work, that's what I'm referring to. It's really life-changing stuff. So wanted to share those 2 stories.
Thank you very much. Something that comes across to me in all of your opening comments is that there's a real egalitarianism of kind, where, as you just described, Andrea, a family that was a refugee family being resettled a decade later is a sponsor to a new refugee. And some of these experiences may be separate, not by a decade, but by a generation or more. But this kind of rotating role or position where it's not just a hierarchy where someone is in a stable position and is able to have power over another person, but that there's a kind of give and take. I heard that also from you, Ibrahim, in this idea of a kind of rotating site visits, that you can be a stranger in the sacred space of another 1 month, and the next month be the host welcoming the strangers to your sacred space. And I wonder, just in a situation of interreligious exchange or refugee resettlement, it seems that there is great possibility of the exploitation of power. And it seems like each of your organizations has been very carefully and thoughtfully organized so as to mitigate the harm that could result from that kind of potential to dominate over another. I wonder if you could comment a little about this. And as you're formulating your thoughts, I just want to remind everyone that after our conversation up here, we will be soliciting your comments and questions via these small cards. So if you have something in mind, please take the opportunity to jot it down, and I'll be able to pose your questions to our panelists a little bit later in our session.
Yeah, so the reason I have this slide fixed here is because we are not 75 years old, like the Church World Service, and definitely not 140 years old. So, we want to close the gap by just keeping it up there, celebrating 25. This is very important in those encounters, because it's never a perfectly balanced power configuration. By the nature of life, some people are positioned with more blessings, more capacity whatsoever, and some are not. And that's one of the very foundational elements in our work. This pertains to this very careful meaning assignment to the term interfaith or multi-faith, however you call it. Our namesake, Rumi, was a universalist, to borrow the term, and an orthodox at the same time. And that's our message. So in terms of your cosmic theology, your doctrinal and faith-related convictions, just remain as who you are, including those with exclusivist doctrines. If that's their non-negotiable, that's going to be it. That also needs to be accepted. But what we are trying to build, you said egalitarian, and I'm going to say like, we'll respect everyone's cosmic theology, but we will build this civic or horizontal theology that is never based on a rivalry or a competition or dispute of doctrines whatsoever. Everything is taken for granted in that space, and everyone is welcome as a neighbor with equal right and privilege and equal accreditation, if you will, into that space. So that's very important in ensuring the success of our work.
I think this is something that both people who come to resettlement, the power dynamic we talk about a lot, because people are coming here, and we are the gatekeepers, essentially, of the services that they know about and the services that they get, and they don't know us from anybody, and so they bring certain ideas about government and government-sponsored programs with them, and so we work really hard to empower people to make their own choices, and recognize the strength that refugees and immigrants bring to both our community and the gifts that they are, as well as the gifts that they bring. And so really trying to educate people, both volunteers and employees that work with us, how to give as much agency as possible to the people that we serve. And we also try to bring as many people into the organization from the refugee community. So if you look at most agencies or most organizations in the United States that you might come in contact with, how many of them are 80% first and second generation immigrants or persons of color across the organization, which ours is, and then 50% in all levels of leadership. And so we really try to bring in people with lived experience into the organization, and then we really try to listen to them and help, and we work together to make collaborative decisions so that it is just better decisions, that is more, has more justice, and is more effective because it empowers people, because we try to empower people. Does that answer your question? Mm-hmm. Okay.
It is a challenge when every single person that you're working with is a volunteer to have that conversation over and over, but it's such an important one. I think that when you come to be a sponsor, you're doing it out of such a space of compassion and love. And we hear people all say all the time, my family this, my family that. And we remind them, they're not your family. They are their own family. But you are very close friends with their family. And people keep saying that because it feels like they're your family. And then you get into a position where you want what you think is best for them, and that might be different from what they want for their own family. And the power dynamic comes in circumstances like that. And I think that's why it's important that sponsor groups do all work with an organization like HIAS to hold their hand through their journey and help them to center throughout the entirety of their program. The refugees are the ones leading the process, and they are there to walk by their side, to help them make the pros and cons list, but not to decide the ultimate decision at the end. We also have some really amazing volunteer groups who are former refugees, who are not just sponsoring people they know, but also sponsoring the stranger. And that's a really exciting thing to see. And you can also talk to other sponsors about their experience and be a great resource. For example, we had a Burmese group of former refugees in Arizona that welcomed a Somali family who they had never met. So we've got incredible stories like that of people coming together at that community level. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. That's great to get an insight into the very conscious and purposeful moves that are taken within the organization in order to make sure that that like most just, rich kind of engagement can happen. So I see that there are some questions being collected, and I'll be asking them in just a moment. While those are being gathered, let me ask another question which follows on the one that you just commented upon, which has to do with challenges that you face in the organization. You've described some of the challenges that you've surmounted in order to keep the terms so equitable. What are some of the other challenges that present themselves, and how do your respective organizations meet those challenges?
In our work, there are these two ends of the spectrum. One is just could be the form of an overexcitement, and the other could be kind of an underexcitement in our work. So the first one is this idea of assigning unrealistic expectations into the interfaith, interreligious, intercommunal work we do as people typically remote from the circles of high power and the big mechanics of the world. And then this could create some sense of disappointment and undervaluing, underestimating of the work itself. And our constant reminder in multiple forms, in different ways of wording, is that the destination is ultimately so valuable. That's where we want to get to. We want to save the world. That's quite an agenda. It's a worthy agenda, but the journey is inherently valuable. You know, without negotiating for a destination itself, even that journey is inherently valuable. And the other, this kind of under-excitement is this branding problem. And those who are responsible for that are people in my role, you know. So we need to do more work on that. And that is these misconceptions about the term interfaith. For some, it may sound allergic because it sounds to them like watering down the differences. So people in my role should build spaces where differences are also appreciated and highlighted. Another one is to have this perception that this is really the work of the most well-versed and the well-studied kind of an elite endeavor. Whereas it can be, of course, dialogue of theological exchange, but it can be in the form of dialogue of personal experience, dialogue of acting together, and other ways. So we've been involved in some programs where people were in the same room for an entire day, didn't have 10 minutes to talk about their respective faiths, but they were working on something together, and as they were walking out with smiles and a sense of meaning and sense of neighborhood. So that's the other problem, this several types of branding misconceptions about the term interfaith.
Thank you. What about some of the challenges that you see in Church World Service or HIAS?
I'll, first of all, sort of following up on what you said, the work we do, we talk about the sacredness of the work that we do. I firmly believe that refugee resettlement is an act of faith and is sacred work. It's also really hard and challenging and rewarding, and there's a lot of adjectives that we could use. I think one of the challenges is, so I've worked with refugees and immigrants in a variety for a variety of organizations in a variety of settings since October of 2000, when I moved to Harrisonburg. And there is nothing, I worked in healthcare, I worked for a university, I worked for an interpreting service, and there is nothing like the paperwork and the number of rules that we have to deal with every day. And it really, I counted the other day the number of databases that we have to enter information in, and I think I'm up to 8 different government databases that we pull information from, forms that we have to, like just the databases, but we have probably 10 forms that we have to fill out with each family who comes. Is that about right? Maybe 10 to 15 or 20. And then each program has its own enrollment, and so the number of rules that we have to keep track of really is challenging, and we're doing it, but the challenge for staff and for us is that it's really taking time away from providing services for refugees. And so some funders are worse than others. The other challenge, I think, sort of the recent events are going to really change the face of refugee resettlement. The recent election, CWS is a nonprofit, and we don't choose sides. We don't support individuals who are running for office, and we're nonpartisan. But I think we're coming into a really challenging time in terms of refugee resettlement, and for immigrants as well. We can't predict the future, but we can take some cues from what has happened in previous administrations and campaign promises about what is likely to happen or what could happen. And so while we can't predict the future, we also don't want to be naive, and we want to prepare for what might come. So some of the things we expect to happen are deportations, not of refugees, but of other clients that we serve. So we don't expect mass deportations because that would be very, very expensive in the billions of dollars. So, but what we are hearing is stories of children who are afraid that even refugee children who have permission to be in the United States are asking their parents if they're going to be deported because they have stories of leaving, of being kicked out or having to flee. We have stories of the schools are preparing for, or helping families prepare for if children come home from schools and their parents have been deported. So we're already hearing stories of that that had happened in the past. We expect, and it will be likely, we expect there to be a travel ban, or what was called in the previous administration a Muslim ban. And we have families who had tickets purchased, had sold everything, even borrowed. We have one guy who borrowed money so that when he came, he would make a good impression, bought new clothes. And then the travel ban went into effect, and he was stuck without a job, owed money, didn't have a place to live, Also, we have stories of people who just made it in. One of our staff members' mothers made it in days before the travel ban went into effect. So we are trying to bring as many people to safety as we possibly can before January 20th. We also don't know when things will close, but we expect it to be a little bit more quick than the previous time. We expect refugee arrivals to significantly decrease in the coming months after January 20th. And refugee resettlement agencies have, so I came in 2019 as sort of in the middle-ish end of the Trump administration. And COVID hit. And so we were all working from home for a while. And then the Afghan evacuation happened. So we went from 0 to 500, the speed of 0 to 500. And then this year we settled even more people than the Afghan evacuation. Luckily, we've been able to hire a lot of staff. Am I going too long?
Well, this is actually a perfect time for me to
Okay.
cut in because many of the questions that you submitted are asking about aspects of exactly the situation that you're describing. So I want to mention a few of the concerns that we all have here as a community that you can continue to address. So one is, given the intensive focus on immigration over the past few years, how has this impacted your organization's ability to provide services to refugees? That's exactly what you've been speaking to. Another writer asks about what sort of response could be productive in the case of mass deportations, and your comment about the unlikelihood of something at a huge scale due to the prohibitive cost, I think, responds to that particular question. But what I think is really at the core of such a question is something that's come through many of these cards, which is just, what can we do? And so I think that might be something that you can continue to address in your comments. And then another specific question asks you to comment on the difference between refugees and undocumented immigrants, and whether your organizations have to take different approaches to those populations.
I've been talking a lot.
I just got back from Ireland from a convening of the Global Refugee Sponsorship Initiative, and when I was there, I heard from people around the world who have been welcoming refugees in a lot of different contexts, including people who were doing this work in Poland during governments that were hostile to refugees, Brazil, people who had a hard period of time and came out the other end of it. And that helped me to think a little bit more long-term and short-term. One of the takeaways that I really had was the importance that civil society plays. When you are welcoming refugees, you need two things. You need the ability for people to enter the country, and you need people to welcome them once they get there. And we have right now both. And I think that even if the number of people coming in slows down significantly, I don't think it'll stop. That's my own personal hopefulness. And we also have people who are already here, like you said, who are going to be really scared. And both agencies like yours and the model that I use to welcome refugees right now, where regular everyday Americans stand side by side with refugees and immigrants and say, I'm going to help you get through a hard period of your life. That model can be used to help folks in that boat too. So I think that there's going to be a lot of opportunity in the face of a lot of challenge to really mobilize at a grassroots level to help our neighbors. And I think that the people in this room are probably already doing that in a lot of ways, and will hopefully be able to take a deep breath and find some strength and do it again. In terms of if someone wants to form a sponsor group right now, if anyone is interested in thinking about that, anyone can do it. We expect that if someone were to submit an application for a sponsor group by Giving Tuesday, which is the first Tuesday after Thanksgiving, that there's a high likelihood that the refugees they're matched with would probably come early to mid-January. And there's a special initiative called the Sponsor Fund that covers 60% of the fundraising costs. So there's an element of welcoming people through going to the airport and picking them up and all that. There's also a fundraising component of fundraising $2,425 per refugee, which is based on the per capita that the U.S. government spent last year per refugee that came into the country on getting them settled. So that money, 60% of that needs to be shown upfront at the time of submitting an application. And that entire 60% is being covered by this special private grant. There's no forms that need to be filled out. Just by clicking submit on your application, you're automatically applied to it. So if folks wanted to mobilize, they would just need to find 5 people, 4 including yourself, take an online training, and put your application together and talk to us at HIAS, private sponsorship at HIAS.org. And we can help you get that in. That 60% of the fundraising costs are covered up front. You can do some fundraising later on. And there's also a special Airbnb program now that will cover up to 60 days in an Airbnb when the folks arrive, because housing is one of the hardest things to do right now with the affordable housing crisis. So that can help to provide a little buffer to make that part less scary.
So I imagine we'll continue talking about these exact issues, but I want to add another question to the discussion. So this question asks, what are your motivations in doing your activities? And I think I'm going to take this as a very broad invitation to talk about your personal connections to the work that you do, how you feel called to do this work, why this work is meaningful to you, or perhaps just your history of doing this kind of work throughout your life.
I'll begin with a larger reference that everyone in this room can claim a share. I'm from southeastern Turkey, a town called Urfa, which is the biblical Haran. And there's this still great deal of reverence and legacy and memory of the patriarch. 1 in every 4 male kids are named Ibrahim, so and back in the decades when the pilgrimage to Mecca was being done through the land without the flights being introduced, this town was one of the stops before the travelers, the pilgrims, crossed into Syria. And when they arrived in the town, all families would send their kids to make sure that they bring someone as a guest to stay with them. It was a big disgrace for the kid to go back to home without a guest. And the city didn't have restaurants until 60s. Like, the idea of selling food to strangers didn't make sense with people. Maybe they weren't market-minded, I don't know. But so it kind of runs very deep. That's one legacy that we are all part of, that we are all children of. And I remember my childhood growing up in Istanbul, of our Yazidi Kurdish neighbors traveling from our hometown to Istanbul, filing their paperwork before leaving for Germany for good, because and both in terms of their ethnic and religious identities, they were under scrutiny and oppression. So that was my witnesshood, maybe something that kind of subconsciously traveled with me, but something way more conscious is that I am a displaced and persecuted individual. So my office in Istanbul was a renovated mansion of an Ottoman noble family by the Bosphorus. So if I dropped my pen off the window, it would fall into the Bosphorus. And 6 months later, I was in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, in front of a UN office, holding a paperwork in my hands and finding some solution, seeking some solution. So this, witnesshood of this cycle between my childhood and my adult years, seeing it in both ends, and in between living a life of privilege is very interesting for me. This cycle, just a reminder that we are really sojourners and travelers, and it's very near to us, either as witness or someone who is directly the victim, or as we see here, with great deal of hope, as someone who can change the course of the events. So that's my personal reflection.
I want to say just what you can do. I'm going to answer some of the previous questions. There's definitely an advocacy arm of Church World Service, and I know IRC has one. A lot of the resettlement agencies have an advocacy arm or an advocacy group. So get connected to one of those if you would like to make change at the state or national or local level. So become involved with government. Don't be the silent people in the land. Speak up. Volunteer. So IRC has a volunteer group. If you are more on the Harrisonburg side of things, you can definitely volunteer with Church World Service. Connect with Rumi Forum. Start your own Rumi Forum in Charlottesville. Sponsor a refugee through Welcome Corps. There's a lot that you can do. In terms of my own journey, it's sort of twofold. I grew up as a missionary kid in Brazil, about 300 miles from the equator. So I grew up speaking Portuguese, and my mom taught me English at home. And so I'm used to, from when I was crawling, being with people who had a variety of backgrounds or weren't from the United States only. And so honestly, it's where I feel the most at home, is with people from other countries and other cultures, even if it's not Brazilian or Latino. And then I think also our country often creates some of the issues that causes people to flee. And so I think we bear some responsibility to resettle refugees as sort of a moral, in addition to faith, but also a moral obligation. And one other thing that really gives me a lot of I can think of motivation to keep working is when I see refugees who come and they're in a very hard place, and the first several years are very, very difficult. But then a couple of years later, they're helping their community. The Kurdish community in Harrisonburg helped welcome the Iraqis. So if you think about history, how meaningful that was. And so as Iraqis were coming in, people, the Kurdish community, wrapped their arms around the Iraqis. During the Afghan evacuation, the Muslim communities in Harrisonburg, we had people at a Presbyterian church camp in Harrisonburg, and so we were doing programming, and it was around Christmas and New Year's, and they fed people for Christmas Eve and Christmas and New Year's Eve and New Year's so we could actually take a break. Sorry. And I'll never forget that. And so refugees giving back to the community and becoming part of the very fabric of our community has been so meaningful. And to see our community change over the last 20 years from a lot less diverse to welcoming so many different kinds of people is why I continue to do the work, and I'll stop talking.
Well, thank you so much, Susannah, for really opening us up to this very personal, the way that it's personally meaningful to you, the work that you do. And of course, we're going to hear your comments as well, but I want to keep adding more fuel to the fire, so to speak, so that there's more and more for us to consider as we move forward. And one of the things that emerges from both of your comments just a moment ago is this idea of a sort of culture of refugees, a culture of immigrants, that whereas we're used to thinking, of a culture of one settled place, you're kind of opening us up to the possibility of a transnational culture based on shared experience. And in particular, the ways that the American context can give a certain character to that. So thinking of your example of Kurdish and Iraqi refugees having a very different kind of relationship of care in the American context than they may have had in their country of origin. So I just wanted to kind of pull that out from both of your comments so that we can reflect on that moving forward. And of course, Andrea, I'm very curious to hear about your personal connection to the work that you do with HIAS.
Absolutely. I think that this is resonating also because I think that a lot of the people in this room probably are descended of refugees also, if not refugees yourselves. And when I think back to my own family history, and I mentioned that HIAS has been operating for quite a long time. And in 1912, when my great-grandfather came to the U.S., he was coming through what was at the time essentially a sponsorship program. He had an uncle who was going to sign for him, and he was going to come into the U.S. And so he was at Ellis Island, and he was sitting in the big room while they called people's names, and people were coming in after him and leaving before him, and he was wondering what was going on. And so he went to the HIAS desk, which was in Ellis Island at the time, and they sent a message to the uncle's house, and they found out that the uncle had passed away while he was on the ship, and he no longer had a sponsor. And so HIAS sponsored him and paid his fare to get through to the mainland, $25 at the time, which was not a small amount of money in 1912. And then he was able to settle in Manhattan. He swept hair in a barbershop and ate grapes for dinner every night and saved up money to bring the rest of his family over. And I have the Shabbat candlesticks that my great-grandmother wrapped in a baby blanket and carried over because she wasn't allowed to bring her possessions with her. So she wanted to smuggle them in. And I think about some of the stories that we tell about folks who are trying to make it to America now, and some of the things that we hear in the rhetoric today about people smuggling things in through the borders or forging paperwork to get in. And a lot of our family histories have stories of doing whatever it took to get their family to safety and thinking about how strong they were for making it here and building a new life despite all the obstacles in front of them. And I think reflecting on that is really powerful for me personally.
I appreciate that, and I want to linger over one element of that answer, which had to do with the kind of rhetoric that you hear. For example, people smuggling reminds you of this story from your own family history. And we're all sharing this world together where we hear a lot of rhetoric, right? Whether it's in print or over the airwaves. And I think it would be very helpful for all of us if you could talk about some of the rhetoric you hear that contradicts your experience from your particular positions, the communities that you work with through Rumi Forum, the people that you get to know through World Church Service, or the refugees that you work with through HIAS. You have a wonderful window onto the real stories that may not fit with the rhetoric that we hear. And I wonder if you could pinpoint a few narratives or common phrases or vocabulary that you have the knowledge to say, it's not really like that. There's a different story that's being twisted, something isn't quite right. And if you could share that insight with us.
I'll begin with an anecdote. So I came to the United States after changing several countries and taking some risks with my family. Unfortunately, we ended up here in 2019. And after maybe several months of kind of nomadic life and search for direction, we ended up in this area. And when I joined Rumi Forum, shortly afterwards, was my first Ramadan in my role. And we were invited to one of the largest synagogues in Washington, D.C. area for an iftar. And then towards the end, as people were having their meal, there was this moment of gratitude as they were inviting people who worked for the program that night. And it turns out that the lady who cooked was a distinguishably Middle Eastern hijabi Muslim woman from Syria, that the synagogue and the congregation was collaborating to assist and help resettle. So why do you welcome the stranger? Because you want to walk in a conservative synagogue on a Ramadan night to have your iftar cooked by a Muslim Syrian woman. That's why you welcome the stranger. But this really pertains to the idea, speaking from an entirely faith lens, really, with very little technicality. This pertains to the idea of how individuals constitute their self, their self as believer of this or this confession. Is it based on a constitutive self that you want to become, or is it based on a constitutive other that you want to avoid and exclude and you want to keep away? So this really is at the very maybe abstract but foundational level. And if you just trace this orbit, you'll realize that those who constitute themselves with that ultimate self they want to become, they are the bravest, boldest, strongest souls. They are your allies. Whereas those who choose to situate and frame themselves according to a constitutive, undesirable other, then it really totally turns the framework upside down. So that's, I think, and this changes the entire way of looking at things, the entire language, and eventually the behavior.
I appreciate that because your experience is specifically interacting with what we might think of as common knowledge, right? And I think that's part of what you bring that's so valuable to us today is specific experiences that may run against common knowledge.
I think I don't need to give the answers. If you reach out and befriend people from different backgrounds and different countries, and you volunteer, you'll know the truth for yourself. And the common knowledge will shift to truth.
I'll offer one answer. I think that one of the things that's really, really frustrating when I hear it is about people just taking charity and living off services forever, which could not be farther from the truth. Nobody comes to America because they want to live off of charity. They come to America because they want to build a new life, and this is the land where they see opportunities available. And I think, we've seen that in our own work on a daily basis, but there's also a study that I believe was actually commissioned under the last Trump administration and then not released because the results were so staggering. And fact check me if I'm wrong on the numbers, but I believe there was a look over, I should probably Google it. It was something like a 10-year look over at refugees that were resettled to the U.S. and how much money we spent on resettling them. And it found that refugees had paid into the U.S. $63 billion more in taxes and other revenue than they had cost to resettle. So in addition to it being a faith and moral thing to do, it's also a really economically sound thing to do to bring in refugees. I would encourage everyone to check my numbers because I'm 100% certain that I got something wrong there, but that is the study that sticks out in my mind that really combats the notion that people are just coming here to live off charity, because people are coming here on day one saying, when can I get to work? I want to provide for my family. I want to build something for the future.
Look up the New American Economy. It breaks it down by state and region in terms of economic contributions to by refugees and from refugees and immigrants.
Thank you all for sharing those insights and experiences and perspectives, and particularly for introducing us to the really excellent programs that you're affiliated with, and for opening the door to ways that we can all support those efforts, either through your organizations or in other ways. So I very much appreciate the invitation and the inspiration and the truth that you've spoken to us all here today. I appreciate very much the questions that you all submitted. I believe that I was able to convey all of them in one form or another. I know I didn't read them all verbatim, but I had them all in front of me and tried to make sure that all of those particular concerns and questions were represented in our conversation here tonight. Fortunately, we have been invited to partake of a reception afterward, so there's good opportunity to continue these conversations. But I'd like to turn things over now to Russ Linden for some closing remarks.
I think we first have to let people know how much. Just two quick things. This program has been recorded. If you don't know how to get it, on the back of the bios, you'll see my name and an email address. Write to me at any time you want. It'd probably be about Tilden a week or two? Yeah. Okay. And We're also going to monitor the nonprofits that are knowing they're going to be facing big funding cuts. We know of a few already. We'll put that information out so you can help. Sorry, we're also going to be broadcasting in the coming months the nonprofits who know that they're going to face huge funding cuts. So we'll share that information. And finally, as Jessica said, let's eat. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.